Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Martin.
And I am Tammy Martin.
And we're the founders of Young Black Leadership Alliance. YBLA is a nonprofit organization that focuses on building leaders in young Black men and women, starting at high school, through college, and into their professional careers. Our program is based on 3 pillars: leadership development, community service, and college and career readiness. Our mission is to build leaders that will make an impact on their peers, communities, and eventually the world.
Absolutely. We always like to start out by thanking our partners at DHG for starting this charge on this initiative to end racial injustice and inequality in the Black community. We thank their team for all the support on making this a reality. But if this is your first time joining us, the YBLA Community Conversation Initiative is about taking a stand against racial inequality and injustice. We are using the acronym STAND to describe this initiative. Now, STAND is for seize the moment, talk to others, act on your biases, no more silence, and donate your resources. We invite you to stand with us to make a better tomorrow in the Charlotte community. We have a target goal of having 2,020 actions towards bridging the gap of racial disparities, and we are getting close.
Getting close.
If you have missed any of the conversations, please visit our website at www.youngblackleadership.org/community-conversations.
Awesome. Welcome to the 14th segment of YBLA Community Conversations. Today, our conversation will be a continuation of the last segment. So 2 weeks ago, Eric Watson, an executive consultant of diversity, equity, and inclusion, facilitated our segment. Just in case you missed it, Eric educated us on understanding diversity, unconscious bias, and conscious inclusion. Man, he taught us a lot.
A lot.
So many nuggets. So to give you a brief recap, he challenged us to use our non-dominant hand.
That's the hard part.
That was a challenge, right? So to write questions in the chat and to do the writing here. By doing this, we learned that it is uncomfortable and awkward using your non-dominant hand at first, but the more you use it, the more comfortable you get.
Yep.
Same is true with diversity and inclusion. It takes practice.
That's right. We learned by having an inclusive culture, businesses are 8 times more likely to have better business outcomes.
That's amazing.
We learned the meaning of the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he gave us a great visual to help us understand the difference between equality, equity, reality, and liberation. That was my favorite slide.
I love that visual.
Yeah.
That's
good.
So another big takeaway was there are 3 types of biases: conscious, unconscious, and group. We found that 99.9 of the biases is unconsciously processed, which means you don't know you have it.
That's right.
Awesome.
That's something, isn't it?
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the last area Eric discussed was on conscious inclusion. And it was all about experience, exposure, and immersion. Basically, it's about exposing yourself to other cultures, being intentional about getting to know another person's culture. One thing that Eric said about his grandmother would always say is that you really don't know a person until they put their feet under your table.
That's absolutely amazing. So today we'll go deep. Eric will go deeper on conscious inclusion and being intentional about creating your personal culture of inclusion, both socially and professionally.
Yes.
So racial equity starts with you, and having the right intention is really what matters.
That's right.
So before we bring up Eric to continue this conversation, we're going to give you an update on our progress towards our 2020 goals. We're getting close.
We're getting close, everybody.
So the last segment, we asked you to give us feedback on next year's community conversation. And thank you, everybody who did that.
That was good. Good
so
information.
Eric, bring up the slide. And Abuna, would you mind giving us an update? Introduce yourself as well, Abuna.
All right, Abuna.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abuna Uche, and I'm currently a junior at Ohio University. Thank God classes are almost done.
Getting close. Just like we're getting close to these to 2020 actions.
Yes, sir. We are currently at 1,744 actions to our 2020 goal.
We're going to make it.
We are 86% there.
Wow. 86%.
Oh.
So is that what you get on your test?
86% is good.
It is good, but Abuna has been an all-A student since you started, right?
Yes, sir.
4.0 all the way, so that's amazing. So thanks, Abuna, for that update. And I just want to say thank you, everybody. Because of your support, we're going to continue this going forward. So I'm super excited about this. So next year, our tagline is going to be Stand 21, Closing the Gap. So we're going to be focused on closing the gap.
That's right. So on to our new call to action. Did you realize that today is Giving Tuesday?
Woo-hoo.
Yes, it's a national day. So today, as our call to action, we are going to give you an opportunity to donate to a worthy cause. It's no secret that our country is going through a crisis now due to Corona.
Wow.
Americans are struggling to pay for rent, mortgage, and food. So not only is this crisis nationwide, but it's literally happening to families in our own backyards. And what we wanted to do for this call to action is to have you help us donate and be able to give to families. So for the next 2 weeks, YBLA has committed to serving 300 families to help them buy food or any essential item. Our goal is to raise $15,000. So each family will receive a $50 gift card from Walmart and Sam's.
Yes, yes. So given that today is Giving Tuesday, we really would like to have you guys help us by sponsoring a family or two during this Christmas time. Now, Abuna is going to put in the chat our link, but it is Giving Tuesday, and unfortunately, our donation provider is actually down at this moment. So we tried it earlier, and the link was not working. So I'm got a feeling that it's probably still not working again. But Abuna, if you wouldn't mind putting our Cash App in there as well. So we're going to give you guys some, for those of you who have Cash App, that's up and running. It doesn't have a problem. You'll see that on there. It's $ YBLA leader. That's another opportunity to give. But if you would like to give and the link's not working right now, do me a favor and just drop in the chat your email. And what we'll do is we'll send you a link once we get it working with our mobile provider. Our donor provider. So
hopefully that'll be today too. So.
I am really hoping it is, since it's Giving Tuesday.
You're right.
It might be Giving Wednesday tomorrow. So we're gonna do what we can do. We can only do that. I would like to say, first of all, I just want to give a thanks to everybody that's going to support. And if you've been watching the news, you've probably seen those long line of cars and people just out, just trying to make it do on today. So
absolutely,
very, very important. So on November 19th, December 19th. So that's coming up. We're going to be hosting a day of service where our ambassadors are going to take the lead in serving families as they drive up and pick up their gift bags. So our YBLA ambassadors will write notes of hope and support, and they'll be placed in gift bags, and we'll be partnering with crisis assistance ministries to identify the families in need. We'll also be partnering with our partner CBI, who will help with the coordination in the space. So please make a contribution. We're going to take 100% of that and give it over to the students. Give it over to the families in need. Yeah.
Totally agree. So you can take a little bit of time there and use the Cash App, or if not, as John requested, you can put your email in there if you plan to give. But we are going to send it back out today. So hopefully our donor system will be working.
Hopefully the system will be up and running. But please go ahead and put your email in there. Thank you, Matt, for putting your email. We definitely see that. And John, we see that as well. I do want to say we have reached another milestone. So my friend Ian is actually on. He's from London.
Oh, wow.
So we have. I want to give a special shout out to London today. So we have someone on from London. Hey, Ian, thank you for your support. Thanks for joining us. If you wouldn't mind, Ian, just dropping in the chat a hello back to us. You ready to get this thing rolling?
Yeah. All right. We might as well go ahead and get it rolling because 100% will go to the family. So let's get Eric on then.
Yeah. So now let's get to it. So our guest facilitator today, as mentioned, is a leader in the DE&I space. He's one of our board members, a great mentor, and also a great friend of mine.
A man full of wisdom.
Full of wisdom. So if I got a question, that's where I'm going. That's my first stop.
Yeah.
So I'm proud to introduce Mr. Eric Watson. Eric, would you please introduce yourself? Tell us where you work, give us your role, your years of experience, and answer this one question, which I'm allowed Tammy to ask the question because it's hers. Go ahead, Tammy. Give them that question.
Eric. Okay, here we go. The question is, can we have a successful society being only respectful of each other's culture, but never being fully consciously inclusive.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
you know, after you said I had so much wisdom and then you gave me a softball question, but that's okay. I'll try my best. I'm glad to be back. Thank you, YBLA, John and Tammy, DHG for sponsoring, and Kaleidoscope for supporting me in this work. I'm executive consultant with Kaleidoscope Group. Been with them for 2 years. I worked in grocery retail, oil and gas, and insurance for 30 years in the insurance space. Ran a nonprofit for the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And again, the last couple of years have been with Kaleidoscope Group. So I am glad to be with you again. It's not often that you get invited back and you have a captured audience. So thank you, John and Tammy, for that. So if I understood the question, can you have a respectful society without being consciously inclusive? I would think today tells us no, because there are a lot of nice people, respectful people, and more specifically, people have not necessarily been conscious in what they have, how they behave. So being respectful, and I'll use this example, could be just speaking, could just be smiling, but you don't know me. And, you know, quoting my grandmother again, that's just an acquaintance and maybe it's just a hello. So I think we're going to spend some time today talking about why it's important to understand yourself before you understand others. So your intentions matter, your conscious behavior matters, but it matters more for you to be conscious of yourself. So let's get started. And as we get started with the competencies that we reviewed last session, there were 5 of them. Demonstrating empathy, communicating authentically, embracing differences, managing privilege, and acting courageously. Now, each of these sort of bring about what I think some knowledge that we need to think about that's pretty clear. Demonstrating means acting. Authentically, authentically means that you're doing something that's genuine. Embracing privilege, we're going to go deep. And then acting courageous. These are things that we're going to spend some time to focus on. So what I'd like to do is challenge you the way I was just challenged by saying authentically, is for you to go out onto a poll and say, which one of the 5 are you challenged by or have the most opportunity to grow? We've got a poll. Demonstrating empathy, communicating authentically, embracing differences, managing privileges, and acting courageous. Which one do you have the most opportunity with? And put that into the poll.
Yeah, so everyone should be seeing the poll right now. Abuna just launched it, so if you guys wouldn't mind, drop in there, and we'll drop the results kind of as we go here. So Abuna, show me what we have for results so far.
Ooh.
Awesome. All right, so far 50%. Oh, it's moving. All right. Oh, wait a minute, it's moving around. So I'm gonna take a pause until it gets there. So far, act courageously is number 1, is leading, and then manage privilege. So act courageously is at 43%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Manage privilege is at 21%. Communicate authentically is 18%. Embrace differences is 12%. And demonstrate empathy is 9%. And so the interesting thing, Eric, is act courageously is sticking at number 1.
Yeah.
But manage privilege and communicate authentically are flipping back and forth. Like it's going from 19 to 20 to 23, and they're just those 2 are literally going back and forth.
So communicating authentically and managing privileges are balancing. Acting courageously, ironically, that's my one that I've had the most opportunity with in my career. You know, as I have moved around. Yep, that's the one that I've had. So that's been my most challenge. Being in corporate America, there are times when, you know, I make decisions, I think, to have everyone get along, have things be, cordial, but I know that there are times when I probably could have been more courageous to move forward. So I think that's a great emphasis for us to look at as we go through today's conversation. Now, let's move to the next slide. I'd like to sort of, put some emphasis on where we're going to go as it relates to self-awareness. When you think about being consciously inclusive, you got to understand yourself, knowing who you are, where you are, and what you want. As a African-American executive, I moved 11 times, but being an African-American professional in Minnesota, Seattle, Texas, Alabama was very different in different locations. And it wasn't just my identity as Black, it was sometimes being a professional. So I had to be aware of what I really wanted. And when you do that, making sure that we understand the impact of our actions is more important than our intentions. And even when you're intentional, you got to be accountable for your actions. So we're going to move through our 5 competencies and talk about looking at ourselves, not looking at others, because one of the challenges around racial equity, we want to look out at others and see how we can help before we know how to help ourselves. So let's move to our first competency, demonstrating empathy, listening intently, and which really gets at, when you think about you want to display empathy, it says, take your shoes off first, which really is saying, I first want to look at myself before I help you. Walking in somebody else's shoes, well, one, you got to take your shoes off to fit into theirs, which I think is, one thing to think about. Managing your personal triggers, managing your personal convictions. We all have things that trigger us, and those are opportunities when it's sometimes best to listen, to learn, and not necessarily be responsible for trying to act. And then promote an environment that's genuine. Genuineness means you're there with empathy to understand someone, not to just necessarily be in charge. So I think that's a good place to start. Now, I'd like for you to throw questions in the chat. If you haven't done so already, please throw questions in the chat. Do you see anything in the chat at this point, Tammy? Any questions that you have?
Okay, no, not yet, but I have a couple I want to kick off here. So Eric, understanding to demonstrate empathy, how do you do that and not seem patronizing?
That's a great question. One, empathy and patronizing conflict, because when you're patronizing, it's condescending. It sends a sense of superiority and talking down to someone. If you're going to display empathy, then you need to at least have people feel like you're at the same level, or even be humble enough to say they're in a superior position. So you definitely have to make sure that you position yourself to be able to learn from them, as opposed to be in the position that you're in a superior position. Make sense?
Yeah.
And patronizing, I think, whether we know it or not, people can feel that. And if you've not felt it, I think most of us have. If you've ever felt that, why would you ever put it on anyone else? So, empathy is a great thing to cause people to pull in and want to be in the space that you're in.
So Eric, can you give me that in the context of like a business environment?
Okay.
Like what does that look like?
So excellent. And I'll say that someone may be in a conversation about a work task, and they're wondering why you're not either getting it done, completing it on time, or whatever, and you may not have understood it, because information does not necessarily guarantee understanding. But just like with some of the things with George Floyd and others, we've got information and then we're acting, we're not responding. So a response is informed, it has understanding. So sometimes when we're asking people to act, we may be asking first, do they understand? So when we see that people aren't responding, are getting, to something the way we might, the gap in understanding could be there. And that gap could be less than what you see in front of you. It could be the fact that they came to that place very different, which is a lot of times missed in corporations. When you come to business, you and I may be in the same workplace, but how we got there could be very different. And the context of it may not be something I experienced. So ask and seek understanding, which really is a great effort of showing empathy when you seek understanding.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So here's another great question in the chat, and we want to, because we want to make this real, right? I mean, we want people to get a lot of value out of this. So the question is, how do you handle this coming from a company that demonstrated that for this, and then moving to a company who says they represent it but don't? And this is in them person's opinions.
Well, I think it's a great point. And as we move around in our careers, culture is very different. Mm-hmm. And one of the things is, and these are my words, be a proud learner and a humble teacher. Mm-hmm. You may have to teach them some of the things that you've experienced that they don't know. You also will have to be somewhat courageous, the one we talked about expressing the fact that their words don't match their actions. And we're going to talk about, communicating authentically in a minute, and that's being respectful. And how do you do that? But one of the things of knowing it and observing it from a self perspective is a wise thing. Secondly, how you communicate it to create change is a second opportunity. And there's no culture that's the same. And I applaud the person who recognizes they're in a different place. So they've got to be different. You can't be the same in a different environment.
Yeah, is that an opportunity for, again, I mean, there's always a balance, right? Because you're in corporate America or wherever you are, and you don't want to make people feel bad or ruin your career. But how do you do that? Is that an opportunity to volunteer, to kind of engage or get active in there, or do you sit back and not?
Well, it's probably not sitting back, but also this, I'm going to always come back to who you are. You want to be genuine. So some people may go and say they want to have a conversation with the CEO. Someone else may talk to someone in HR. Another person may just talk to their boss. You probably want to seek the level of being able to teach in a way that also shows respect for what the culture is, because they may not know. On the other side, they may not understand. But at the same time, where's a space where you can get traction? And then there's other times where, there's anonymous, there could be an engagement survey and other things, but you do want to find a path that fits you and fits the culture so you can be effective.
Mm-hmm. And also, Eric, Alan Anderson dropped a question hey, Alan, dropped a question in our chat. He kind of brought it closer to home. It said, how have you effectively modeled empathy to your children or mentees?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Yeah.
One, and John is going to laugh because I'm going to say this. My best method of empathy is I have millennial mentors. Mm-hmm. So they know that I know less than they know about a certain subject. So I come to them humbly saying, teach me about who you are. And I've got, a level of empathy for their knowledge. So I'm not coming at a position of power. I'm coming at a position of balance so that I learn from them. And our children, I know our children can sometimes they can be authentic, but may not be as humble. They'll tell us things that are the truth. I think we got to embrace them. And I know it's just one of the things for me. The young people, as we've seen most recently this year, have been very powerful in expressing who they are. There's lessons in that. And there's an opportunity for us to learn from younger people, especially our children who, for the most of their lives, they've been very obedient to us. And there's a flip in that. You don't want to wait till you need them when you're old and you want to listen. Now's the time to listen and learn as well. That's a great question, Alan.
Yeah, and you really got a good point there. You don't want to wait until you're old when you have to show some empathy to start showing empathy. That's for sure.
That's right.
Okay, Eric, you can go on to the next one.
All right, let's move to the next one. Communicating authentically. This really talks about embracing and sharing your respectful truth. I shared this in the last question, but when you think about doing things in a respectful way, meaning you want people to hear it. You want people to know and understand exactly what you're trying to communicate to them. So you got to consider the audience, and you want to listen more than you talk. You want to clarify for understanding and seek to consider their opinion. Ask questions like, things like, tell me about a time, so that you can really connect with them. Or use something like, What was it like? Those kinds that those the open-ended questions as opposed to what church do you go to? What school did you go to? What city are you from? Which don't, they're inquisitive, but those are the typical kind of things that don't lead to engagement and they're not authentic. So those would be the kind of things in sharing ideas. Sometimes it's the last part, sharing ideas even when they're not popular. Sometimes it goes back to courageousness. If you do it respectfully, people can hear it. But sometimes when you have an unpopular thought, you got to think about how do I deliver it if you want it to be heard versus just saying, I delivered the message, it's up to them. Remember, the gift of any lesson is valued by the receiver, not by the giver. So if you want to provide a gift, you want to do that in a way that people can receive it. So the next, let's go to the next slide. We'll move a little fast. Embracing differences. So embracing differences is intentional, proactive act of valuing diverse perspectives and backgrounds of others. One of the things that we do, and we did this with the writing, you want to make sure that you're not always hanging out with people that are like you, because that way you're always comfortable. And then you're not going to have an opportunity that you're going to be exposed to different things. Most times when people are like you, how many times have we found ourselves saying, that's right, I get it, I understand. Typically, you're talking to people who you know. Demonstrate the ability to grow by being in different places, with different people, doing different things, and get to know them and value their differences. And when you talk about self-development, understand that variety is going to help you grow more than the same thing. So when you look for different perspectives on your teams and with the people that you work with, then you're going to get a different result. But you got to embrace those. You can't reject them. And it's sometimes uncomfortable when we hear things that we're not used to hearing, but you got to put yourself in that space so that you grow. And let me take a break and see what other questions might you have in the chat or questions that you have for me.
All right, Eric, I was ready for this one. This is a question of mine, really, is how do you communicate the respectful truth without just offending somebody? Because like if you see something like, okay, how am I going to tell this person, but you want to be real, but you want to be respectful. So how do you communicate that?
Well, and it's your truth is the first thing. So that's what you got to understand. It's your truth.
Okay.
And the operative word is respectful. So if you want them to hear it, you might want to be respectful. And last time I gave you an analogy, I've been married 39 years, so I've got plenty of examples. If my wife, Susan, has on a lipstick that maybe, I don't like, but she likes, my respectful truth might be, I like the lipstick you wore here, in a way that she can receive it, as opposed to saying, I don't like that lipstick. Because if you know my wife, then that's not only respectful, it's going to get a different response. So if you want people to accept it, and especially if you're in the workplace and you think about it, the workplace should be respectful. You should be saying things to people so they can hear. And when you talk about racial issues, those are things that are personal to people. And so if I need to express something to someone, one, I want to be truthful. Two, I want them to help. I want them to hear it. But thirdly, to be effective, I've got to make sure it's in a respectful way. And those are the challenges I think we're facing in our corporations as we think about listening sessions, things that people have different views on how they've lived, have they grown. Some people just don't know. But telling the truth is important. Doing it in a respectful way is how it's going to be heard. Other questions in the chat?
Hey, Eric, how'd your wife like that response when she asked you about a lipstick?
Well, one, she didn't change the lipstick, number one. We knew that. Number two, she did share with somebody that I didn't like it. So, it was a respectful message. And I don't think it was going to be changed either way. But I was heard, and there was a response.
Sometimes it's just being heard. Sometimes it's just being heard.
Both were respectful.
So there's a question in the chat I'm going to come back to, but I want to piggyback on kind of one of the things that you said and ask a different question. So different cultures communicate differently. And I know, how do people who may not have been interacting with different cultures receive that, right? Because what I tend to see is that like Black women a lot of times get blamed for being aggressive and things of that nature, when that just may be their communication style. People are not used to that type of communication style. So what's the thought around that? Because that's around embracing differences. But if you're not used to those differences, you don't understand that. How do you embrace it?
And so, John, you just hit on the reason for this conversation. Consciously know who you're talking to and be aware of yourself. So if I'm in a position or in a situation, in business or personal, when I consciously know I'm working with someone from a different culture, it requires that I be sensitive to that, be aware of that, and know that if it doesn't, and I won't use the word translate, if it's not understood, that's something I have to own, not having them own. And that's what's important. And then when I say you're conscious of it, being aware of myself, how did I communicate that in a way that it could be heard, knowing that it's a different culture? Where I think that we have the most slip-ups, especially in business, is not only are we not conscious, we use ethnocentrism, meaning we're in my business, we're in my country, this is how we talk, so I just talk this way. And then when it's not understood, the ethnocentric aspects of it causes me to feel like I'm right, as opposed to the fact that consciously, I should understand different cultures may see things different. And as my CEO, Doug Harris would say, that's an opportunity to grow, not an opportunity to be right. So, that's where we've got to, and I love the question, that's when we've got to recognize everyone didn't grow up in the same culture. Every African-American that grew up in Charlotte, or Black person, didn't grow up the way I did. My culture is different. My experiences are different, let alone someone who is African, who looks like me, but they grew up in Nigeria. So cultural diversity is something we've talked about for a long time. What we haven't done is experience the cultural differences in a way that we can grow. We typically experience them sometimes to be more reflective of what we see, not what others see in us. And that's where the work is still yet to be done. So I love the question because it really gets back to what we're trying. Being conscious and being self-aware is how you get into different cultural opportunities to grow.
Yeah, right. All right, well, let me grab this question from the chat then. So how do you communicate authentically when the receiver may have barriers/walls in receiving your message?
Almost like your question.
That's a great one. Remember, the gift is valued by the receiver. If they don't hear you, you don't take that as a personal thing. All you can do is provide the gift. And there's our times, I think we've all had times to where we don't feel we were heard, but don't necessarily create, again, you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. So if you don't hear it, that's okay. But see, that's part of the work that we've got to do, because we know that there's times when you don't hear me, John. Now the wall's up. We don't get along, and we may be working together for years over one incident where you didn't hear me. So there's times when people don't hear you. And there's clearly people who I know may not agree with me in everything I do. But it's up to me to own the fact that I am who I am, and I've made the attempt to communicate with them and then get to know them. And there could be reasons. I'm going to give you this short aspect that sort of gets to the point of why we need to know why someone may not be open to hearing what we hear. And I'll try to do it quick. It has to do with, I think I can do this anonymously. A student came to school, he slept in class in the morning. The teacher was very offended that he came to class and slept. And he was rude about waking up. Now, you would think the teacher would get that. Well, this student got up at 4 o'clock every morning to give his mother diabetes medicine, to feed his mother, to get 2 siblings prepared for school, and then go to school and catch the bus at 5:45. So not knowing the background of why he was sleeping, the teacher's wondering, why can't he hear me when I'm saying you don't sleep in class? In behind that is something different. I make that point in an accentuated way to say, sometimes when people don't hear us, it's not that they don't want to. It could be who they are, which we don't know. It doesn't mean that we don't provide our respectful truth, but just understand that everybody is going. Agreement is not the goal. Agreement is not the goal. Alignment is more important. And if you get aligned, at least people heard you, and your goals can be achieved through alignment, not total agreement. Because I think we all know, if you've been on any boards, you've been in an executive room, not everybody comes into that room agreeing that this is going to be the goal, but they get aligned. And that's how you go forward. So great questions. Anything else in the chat? Did that sound, anything else to that sound good?
All right, it sounded great. I do have a different question. I got lots of questions. So
Okay.
these are great areas. And again, if you have questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat for us. We'll definitely make sure we grab those. Or if you just like my questions, put a smiley face in the chat. So the question I have, and this kind of goes back to some of the work that we've been doing recently with the conversations we've had with leaders. So we've been working with some leadership teams, and those leadership teams are predominantly white, predominantly male, which is not unusual. The higher up you get in corporate America. And one of the struggles that the leadership team is having, as well as the minorities underneath them, is feeling like they're not able to communicate. So the minorities underneath them are really feeling they're not able to be heard by this group of folks that just don't understand them culturally. So what can be done in that situation? Because I think a lot of people are struggling with that right now.
Yeah, so great point. And you may have to cut me off because this is one of the challenges. One, this whole conversation around racial equity, most leaders and most of diversity work for history's time was around equality. So I'm not going to say the leaders are bad, but they're just, from an equality standpoint, I've got diversity in my organization. They're not in tune to how equitable is it. What's your experience like? Again, I'm going to come back. John, you and I are working for the same company, and then there is a white CEO. And let's say we're all in the same executive cabinet. Our path there is going to be very different. So to assume that there's equity in that environment is very different unless I get to know. So most of the CEOs at executive levels, not all, they probably haven't had experience or exposure to people who are in the organization. Secondly, their experience at an executive level, right or wrong, hierarchy creates barriers. That's why it's like a pyramid. And we all know they get less information than they should at times because, in our minds, they don't want to hear anything bad. So if I'm having a bad experience, how do they hear about what it's like to be Black in their organization? That's typically not going to be something that's a path to that level. That's something organizations have to change, because you can't wait until you have an issue that now we want to, offload something that's gone on for years, and it's around hierarchy. And it isn't always about race, but it is hierarchy. The other thing that I would say to you, and this is specific, this council, I know KG, and we've given a lot of, if I'm in that position and I don't know about people who are different in my organization, specifically African Americans or people of color or anyone that's diverse, I'm not going to learn by talking. So listening is a space to be, because number one, if I don't know you, I probably don't know the answer to your challenges. So right now, we need to be in a space, if you're a senior leader, to listen. Listening to understand, not listening to act. And I'm being redundant, but in a lot of the George Floyd incidents, there was reactions, not responses. And responses are informed. And it may not be totally educated, but it's informed. So I would say any executive should come to a room and say, I just want to listen so that I can understand what it's like in my organization, for you, and set an expectation that, I don't have a magic wand that I can solve it tomorrow, but I am going to be aware of it. So I said this earlier, leaders need to be able to lead and learn at the same time.
Yeah.
Be able to grow while they're leading. Organizations do have to give them room to grow. But you can't expect a CEO after this topic is raised all of a sudden to become an expert. But if you got to put in the effort, though, you got to put in the effort. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but you obviously hit a chord. I mean, I really think executives right now should be in a space of listening as opposed to having the answers and wanting to be right. They should be in a space of what can I learn from a group of people they've acknowledged I don't know.
Right.
That's a great question.
And Harry, one more in here. Dominique wants to know, how do you manage those who interrupt constantly during discussion and messaging? That is a good one, because we all know the people that you try to talk to, they constantly interrupting you.
As much as I talk, that could be pointed to me. But when people interrupt, and we know in our psyche we're saying, I wish they would, let me speak. One of the things you have to sometimes set a decorum of expectation, and this is something an executive told me a long time ago, is sometimes you may have to interrupt them and say, when you're done, I'd like to say something. Is that your point? Can I add to that? I'm not sure that I understand you, but here's my point of view. And I'm not saying interrupting them is the best, but you have to engage them at a level in which they're used to. Understand now, being respectful, most people who do that aren't aware, and it's become a habit. Now, development for them may be different for you, but that's another opportunity to engage consciously. And when you come across that in situations where there is a racial divide, there's even a deeper conversation around how they both got there, because that person may have that habit. Obviously, if they're in a corporate environment, they haven't just started that. They've grown up in that environment. So it's something that's got to be addressed for them to be successful and you to be successful. But more importantly, when it comes to the place of being a space of equity and you're different and there's a racial component, you do want to provide your respectful truth. So that means at some point, you may have to have a conversation with them and say, I just want to share with you, when we engage, this is what's happening. And I want you to be able to hear it so that I can hear you and you can hear me.
Right. Back to acting courageously.
Yeah.
Which is what we all struggle with.
Yeah, I think like to your point, sometimes you got to pull people to the side and have that conversation. If they're a good leader, they'll probably listen. If not, maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, there's 3 rules. Feedback. I mean, sometimes you can do it in a moment, which, that may not be the best. Sometimes you have to step back and say, hey, in that meeting, this is what that felt like. And then other times you have to step all the way back and say, can we have a conversation? I really want to talk about how we engage each other and share just how you feel. And that all takes courage. Yeah.
Yes.
And authentic communications.
Right. Okay, we can move on.
All right. So let's move to our next slide, which is a deeper one, and we are just now getting to it.
Yes. Good segue.
Managing privilege. And anybody that's on this phone, this Zoom meeting, is privileged. So let's be clear about that. And so we have to educate ourselves about our own privilege. We have to make sure that we also challenge ourselves around our privilege in the culture that we're in. And maybe sometimes uncover the unique aspects of how our privilege may be helping others feel less than, and we don't know it, and take responsibility for that. And more importantly, and we've heard this word, become an ally. We know, this is one of those things that the most significant privilege is economic in our society today, and I would say in our community. So we know when we are in a situation where we're privileged, and some of that's earned, some of it's unearned. But when it's unearned, you got to know how to engage in a way that creates fairness and being an ally. So I think that's important. Any questions in the chat about managing privilege?
Not yet, but again, give me an example of, as a Black man, the privilege I may have.
Okay, so I'm just going to be real clear. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that I'm privileged. I may not have grown up that way, but that's one of the things that we want to acknowledge. And this is not about me, but someone asked me the question about, an example. Privilege is a simple, John, you got a car, I don't have a car. And so whether that means a lot or nothing, that's a privilege you got that I don't have. What's more daunting in the racial context is when you come into the work environment and there may be, because of your school, because of your ethnicity, you have the ability to meet in certain places, go with certain people. And I'll give you an example. Growing up in corporate in this situation, to be in a restaurant that I was invited by mostly people who don't look like me, they've got the privilege to go there and feel very comfortable. When I was young in my career, I'd be remiss to say I was uncomfortable being in a place where I was the only Black person in the restaurant, let alone playing golf. Now, you grow through those things, but my point would be that unearned or that unseen privilege that people who were not looking like me, who were white, to be comfortable to go in and eat. And while I'm more concerned about, how do I look? How do I feel? That's the kind of thing that happens in a corporate environment. It can happen in a social environment. It can happen in a boardroom. I'll say this because I know we're running short on time. One of the things around hierarchical privilege, when I first became an officer, I went in to do my first board presentation. And not the CEO, but the most highest senior executive, as I'm in the boardroom, came in a few minutes late. And he looked in the room and saw me and said, "Oh, I'm in the wrong room." Now, he was in the right room, and it wasn't intentional, but that was a privilege he had that he didn't know the impact that had on me, for him to look at me and say he's in the wrong room. Now, when you say that's a privilege, that's because he's used to being in that room. He's seen that room as his room. Me being in there made it different. And so when you talk about hierarchy and privilege and, the ethnicity aspect, I was the only Black person in the room, but that didn't matter. For me, I finally got in the room. But to get in the room and have privilege be something that made me feel one down did not feel good. Now, I was able to still get my report done that day. But my point would be, the difference would have been if he'd have come in and say, "Eric, good to see you. Glad you're here." As opposed to saying, "I'm in the wrong room." So those are just some of my personal examples. I think there are people, and there may be questions in the chat. I don't want to go on questions in the chat about privilege. This is a good one.
Got a couple of questions. Ian said, in the UK, privilege is caught up with class as well as race. What methods have you found successful in getting people to accept that they are privileged?
That's a great question, and there is no silver bullet. I think having people acknowledge privilege, especially when it's class, is not an easy thing to do. Because one, when you grow up that way, sometimes there is an unconsciousness around having certain privilege or class privilege because it's how you grew up. But don't tell me you don't understand what people are the people who are less than. So addressing that in a situation when people have class, it gets back to acting courageous and having challenging questions, because you can't address it as privilege as much as you want to address it as a situation that has a different impact on you. And I think, having traveled to, different parts of the world, London being one of them, in different cultures, privilege means something different, and it just doesn't change. So ethnicity may be one, but there is the reality that even in the US, there are people who look like me, who are more privileged than me, that clearly still look down at me and have opportunities that I don't have, regardless of what I have today. And that managing that privilege is very difficult. I'm going to give you the only answer I can come to right now, and it's my grandmother's. You got to get to know them. Now, they may not want to get to know you. And there was a premise I had growing up. I'm really going off the rails now. It was called the Watson principle when I was a young executive. I reached out to the CEO and everybody. They had privilege, they had position. I invited them to my apartment. I invited them to go with me. Now that took a little bit of courage, but I reached to them and they didn't reach to me. What I found is that a lot of people never ask them to go anywhere. But in that space, I learned that, their privilege of being an executive, they were willing to step down, but I had to have the courage to ask. And I learned, and I'll close off with this, my CEO, one organization, we sat at a table. He came from Canada. I just assumed he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He grew up on a farm in Canada. I say this in all due respect. He smoked the pipe, I smoked the pipe, but his teeth were bad. And I was trying to figure out, but he said he grew up, he didn't have dental health care. He grew up on a farm. He went to college, went to New York, worked on Wall Street. He got lucky, he got a CEO job, but he didn't grow up like I thought, privileged. Because I kept wondering, if you're so privileged, why don't you have good dental? And he was just saying, he didn't grow up. He grew up on a farm. So part of that is not answering the question, but my point, there's no silver bullet other than the thing we've said over. Knowing yourself and how you can engage others is a method that I've used.
Yeah, we got about 9 minutes. Why don't you go ahead and finish up, and then we got a couple more questions. We'll go ahead and
Okay,
wrap up.
and I'm just going to slide to acting courageously, which was the biggest one. And I just sort of shared that. I don't know that I can go any deeper other than the one thing that I've learned about not acting is that you sometimes don't create a path for others to come behind you. So I think about some things that when I was in a corporate executive position, I helped people understand things, and I maybe didn't do it in a demonstrative way. For instance, if you had a problem, I might take that problem, but I would not share that it was your challenge or your problem. So people, they would talk to me about it, but they really wouldn't get the impact of it because they didn't get to know you. And I still think about, I thought I was protecting you when really probably I was protecting them because I was comfortable with them. And I could have made them a little more uncomfortable by saying, John has a challenge and John and I want to meet with you. And that's just an example of how I think in a leadership role, I could have been more courageous in helping some of our leaders learn. So I could probably talk to that a lot, but and I know it's a challenge, but let's see, I know we got only a few more minutes. What other questions do you have?
Well, one is is it easier to act courageously from the top of the organization or while you're at the bottom of the organization? Because when you're at the bottom, to me, it feels like you're just trying to survive. So how do you do that from lower parts of the organization?
Well, a lot comes to mind, but clearly you would say when you're in an executive position, it's easier. But the example I just gave you, the dichotomy becomes very different. And I used to say, I would, anything that anyone, when it's a diversity, had an issue with, bring it to me. I'll be glad to take it to the top. What I didn't get is enough of the people at the top giving me their challenges so that I could bring them. The other thing I learned is I always saw this as a hierarchical issue. There's a tops down, the leaders, there's a bottoms up. If you don't get enough of the bottoms up engaged, the culture is not going to change. So it's easy to be courageous in a executive position because there's not much risk. I think people in lower positions get a little concerned, but I applaud those people. And I've had them come to me that have had issues. They're at a lower position, but they were willing to challenge that and begin in a racial environment that changes it for everybody. So when people say they've got issues, it's one thing to say it's not my issue. It's another thing to not respect the fact that's an issue they've got. And I think as a leader, you got to own helping them understand it and the organization understand it. I don't know that it's easier either way. I think there's a dichotomy regardless of level.
And Eric, as a leader at the top of an organization, how can they create a culture in the organization where, as you were saying, the bottom up people will feel more comfortable in acting courageously?
Well, corporations are a lot better today than 30 years ago when I started, because there used to be, tremendous, barriers, legal and a lot, to saying what's not working. But any organization, and I had a CEO, and I hate to keep it, that used to say, I say things and I run to the end of the organization to hear what I said. Go to the end of the organization and see what they say. You got to spend time, especially at the point of execution. This isn't a diversity. This is a business thing. If you really want to understand how a business runs, go to where the execution is, not where the strategy is. And where the execution is where your most diversity is going to be. And where that diversity is going to be where the challenges are that nobody's going to bring to you, most likely, because nobody brings problems to the CEO. They bring they bring solutions. So I think any leader who wants to know about what's going on at different levels, you got to go to that level and don't depend on other people to bring it to you. But there's all kind of system, engagement surveys, data. There's a number of ways to get data. The other thing, you can't get data and not act. You got to act on it.
I'm gonna rewind a question for you. So someone asked, is privilege for men more prevalent than for women?
Of course. Yeah, I can tell you in my career, I came up and I had to challenge this in our organization. We did not have a woman that was at a director level, but we had, and I was promoting people. We had 5 Black African-American men VPs. So I had to check and say, what's going on? And we did some work. We actually put a focus on women of color at director level. We created a development program. We brought in a consultant, and I got some insight from Pepsi. But yes, clearly, unintentionally, and when I say unintentionally, I think we were not as conscious of it, that as we promoted diversity, there were not women engaged, and it had to be intentional. And I think that privilege does exist. No question.
Talks about that conscious inclusion, right? So
there you go.
Being aware. I think a lot of times in leadership, we're busy running back and forth, trying to execute, get the numbers done, get things done, and you just don't pay attention to what's happening around you in terms of people. So that can easily happen.
Yeah, someone said to me that there's not a better analogy as it relates to racial equity than the emperor with no clothes on. If you put that in a racial context and say, how could CEOs not know this?
Yeah.
Nobody told them they had no clothes on when it came to racial equity. Nobody said anything to them.
Yeah. I guess after that, it's a great point to wrap up on. It's really incumbent of the leader, once they know they have no clothes on, to use your analogy, to put some clothes on and to really do some things. And
the leader has to work to get that information, because a lot of times it seems like the CEO or the leader of the organization, like Eric said, they get more of the solutions, not so much of the problems.
Yeah. And I guess to your point, that's where courage comes in, right? So people down the organization, if it's the next level manager, or if it's 3 levels down, or if it's the dude in the mailroom, has to make sure that person knows. And it's incumbent on the leader to go down to the end of the organization, to your point, Eric, and to hear those messages. So I want to thank you, man. That's good. I got a page full of notes written with the right hand this time, and got a lot of questions answered. Thank you, everybody in the chat. It's absolutely amazing, Eric. You really bless us every time you come and speak to us.
He's the wise one, right?
The wise owl.
I truly appreciate the authentic opportunity, though I couldn't pronounce the word when we started. But one, I want to thank the folks that asked the real questions in the chat. That was good. And I appreciate YBLA, the work that you're doing. Honored to be on the board, and the work what we're achieving with young people. So thank you.
Yeah. This is super awesome.
Yes. So thank you, everyone, for joining our 14th segment of YBLA Community Conversations. We hope you gained a lot of insight like we did about racial equity. Starts with you. We want to thank our amazing panelists, Eric, for facilitating our session today, and even the session 2 weeks ago. So we also want to thank our partners, DHG, for their support as well.
So our next segment will be on Tuesday, December the 15th.
That's the last one.
It'll be our last segment for the year. So the last one for 2020. We will be wrapping up our 2020 goals. We will hit our target. We're almost there. You guys are going to bring it home for us. So on that session, we're going to bring back some of the panelists to get an update from the actions that are happening now. We're getting a lot of great stuff in, so we'll give you guys an update on that. We're also going to celebrate, as I mentioned, the goal of 2020. So we're going to hit that goal. We're going to be celebrating them. We're going to make those system level changes as we continue to do.
Absolutely. We're going to send out the link again today. It sounds like somebody was able to get through there.
Yep.
So that was great. So maybe
we got at least one donation. We got one.
And we're going to be running this for the next 2 weeks. So because our day of service will be December the 19th. So you still have time, but help us reach our $15,000 goal, because we really want to make an impact in the Charlotte community.
Again, if you want to have us send you the link directly, throw that email in the chat for us. Again, Eric, we got a lot of thank yous in there. A lot of folks said they learned a lot, and we're definitely excited about that. As always, if your company, if you guys want more information on training in the DE&I space, please email us at stanclt@youngblackleadership.org. We are looking forward to seeing you guys next time for the last segment.
Yes, and have a wonderful day.
Have a great one.
Thank you.